There are conversion stories that are interesting. There are conversion stories that are moving. And then there are conversion stories that are so unexpected, so layered, and so thoroughly documented that they stop you completely and force you to think. The story of Yusuf Estes is in that last category, because this was not a man who was searching for religion. This was a man who already had religion. He was a Christian minister. He was a music industry businessman. He was a proud, comfortable, successful American who had no reason whatsoever to change anything about his life. And then a Muslim came to stay in his house, and nothing was ever the same again. Yusuf Estes was born in 1944 in Rockford, Illinois. He grew up in a deeply Christian household in Texas, where faith was not something that sat quietly in the background, but was woven into the fabric of daily life. His family were devout Christians, and he was raised with a strong personal belief in God, in Jesus, and in the Bible. This was not a superficial, religious upbringing. It was genuine, heartfelt, and deeply rooted. As a young man, Estes built a successful career in the music industry and in the business of supplying musical equipment and entertainment services. He was entrepreneurial, energetic, and ambitious. He worked hard, built his business, and lived a comfortable American life. He was also, throughout all of this, a practicing Christian who took his faith seriously. He was involved in his church community, and at various points in his life he engaged in Christian ministry and outreach. By the time he reached his 40s, Estes was a man who seemed to have everything figured out. His business was successful. His faith was settled. His life was comfortable. He had no theological questions that were troubling him, no spiritual emptiness that was driving him to search. He was, in the fullest sense of the word, content. Then in 1991, something happened that he could not have anticipated. His father, who was also a businessman, entered into a business arrangement with a man from Egypt. This Egyptian businessman was a Muslim, and as part of the business relationship, this man came to stay with the Estes family in their home in Texas. Yusuf Estes was not pleased about this. He was a Christian minister, and he saw this as an opportunity. Not an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to convert. He decided that while this Muslim man was staying in his house, he would use the time to introduce him to Christianity and bring him out of what Estes viewed as a misguided religion. He was confident. He had his Bible. He had his theology. He had years of Christian ministry behind him. He was ready. What happened instead became one of the most remarkable and widely shared conversion stories in the modern Islamic world. From the very first days, Estes began observing this Egyptian Muslim in his home. And what he observed was not what he expected. He had certain images in his mind of what a Muslim would be like. What he found instead was a man of extraordinary character, a man who was calm, who was honest, who was generous, who was respectful, and who carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity that Estes found deeply impressive. The man did not push his religion. He did not argue. He simply lived it. And the way he lived it was visible in everything he did. Estes watched him pray. 5 times a day, this man would stop whatever he was doing, perform a careful ritual washing, spread his prayer mat, and stand before God. Estes had never seen anything quite like it. The prayer was physical, it was structured, it was disciplined, and it was clearly deeply meaningful to the man performing it. There was nothing casual or performative about it. It was the prayer of someone who genuinely believed he was standing before God. Estes began asking questions, not hostile questions, genuine questions. He wanted to understand what this man believed and why, and the answers he received were not what he expected. The Muslim man spoke about God in terms that were clear, simple, and intellectually coherent. God is one, absolutely one. Not 3 in 1, not a Father and a Son and a Spirit. One God, without partners, without equals, without physical form, the creator of everything that exists. And this God had sent prophets throughout human history. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and finally Muhammad, peace be upon all of them, each one carrying the same essential message of monotheism, each one confirming those who came before. Estes found himself in an unexpected position. He had come to this conversation as a teacher, and he was discovering that he was being taught, not aggressively, not condescendingly, but clearly and honestly, in a way that he could not easily dismiss. He turned to his Bible. He wanted to find the passages that would demonstrate the divinity of Jesus and the doctrine of the Trinity. He knew his Bible well. He had been reading it his whole life. But as he read it now, with the questions that this Muslim man had raised in his mind, he found himself reading familiar passages in a new way. He found himself noticing things he had not noticed before. He read the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verse 29, where Jesus says, "The most important commandment is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Jesus was quoting the Shema, the Jewish declaration of absolute monotheism. He was not saying God is three, he was saying God is one. He read the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verse 3, where Jesus prays to God and says, "This is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent." Jesus was praying to God. Jesus was describing God as the only true God. Jesus was describing himself as someone who had been sent. These were not the words of a man claiming to be God. He read the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 36, where Jesus says, "But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." If Jesus were God, how could there be something that God the Father knew, but God the Son did not know? This was not the description of an omniscient divine being. This was the description of a prophet who had been given revelation, but not complete knowledge. Estes began to feel something shifting inside him. These were questions he had never seriously confronted before, because he had never had reason to. His faith had been comfortable and unchallenged. Now it was being challenged, not by hostility, not by mockery, but by honest questions that his own Bible seemed to be raising when he read it carefully. He picked up a copy of the Quran and began reading it for the first time in his life. He had certain expectations. He expected to find something alien, something hostile to the Bible, something that contradicted the religious tradition he had grown up in. What he found was different from anything he had anticipated. The Quran affirmed Abraham. It affirmed Moses. It affirmed Jesus. It affirmed the virgin birth of Jesus, in terms that were, if anything, more explicit than what he found in some parts of the New Testament. In chapter Maryam, the Quran devotes an entire chapter to the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus, describing her purity, her devotion, and the miraculous nature of the birth of Jesus, in terms of profound reverence and respect. The Quran described Jesus as the Messiah, as a word from God, as a spirit from God, as one of the greatest of the prophets. It described his miracles in detail. It honoured him completely. But it described him as a human being, as a prophet, as a messenger, not as God. In chapter Al-Ma'idah, verse 75, the Quran says, "The Messiah, son of Mary, was no more than a messenger. Many messengers had passed away before him. His mother was a woman of truth. They both used to eat food." Estes read this and thought about it carefully. Jesus ate food, a human biological function. The Quran was making a simple, clear, logical argument. A being that needs to eat food to survive is a created being, not the creator. He also read the Quranic account of the crucifixion. The Quran in chapter An-Nisa, verse 157, says that Jesus was not killed on the cross, that it was made to appear so to those who saw it, and that God raised him up. Estes examined this claim and found that even within the Christian scholarly tradition, the details of the crucifixion account had inconsistencies across the four Gospels that scholars had debated for centuries. The Quran's position was different from mainstream Christianity, but it was not without historical and textual support from within the biblical tradition itself. As the days passed and the conversations continued, Estes found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The theology he had built his religious life on was not holding up under honest examination the way he had expected it to. The questions that this Egyptian Muslim had raised, simply by living his faith clearly and answering questions honestly, were questions that Estes could not answer satisfactorily from within his existing framework. Then something happened that Estes has described as the turning point of his entire journey. He was sitting with the Muslim man, and they were discussing the nature of God. Estes was trying to explain the Trinity. He was trying to articulate how God could be three and one simultaneously. And as he was speaking, he heard himself. He heard what he was actually saying. And for the first time he felt that he could not make it make sense. Not to the Muslim man. Not even to himself. He had been saying these words his whole life. He had been teaching them to others. But sitting in that room, being asked to explain them clearly and logically to a man who was listening respectfully and taking every word seriously, Estes found that the words did not hold together the way he needed them to. After weeks of conversation, reading, and internal struggle, Yusuf Estes made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He accepted Islam. He said the Shahada. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. A Christian minister in Texas in 1991 became a Muslim. But the story did not end there, because then something even more remarkable happened. His wife watched the transformation in her husband. She watched the change in his character, in his peace, in the clarity and conviction with which he now spoke about God. She began asking her own questions. She began reading the Quran herself, and within a short period of time, she also accepted Islam. Then his father, the businessman who had first brought the Egyptian Muslim into their lives, began his own journey of examination, and he too accepted Islam. One Egyptian Muslim businessman, staying as a guest in a Christian home in Texas, had, through the simple power of his character and his honest answers to honest questions, brought an entire American Christian family to Islam. Yusuf Estes went on to become one of the most recognized and widely heard Islamic scholars in the English-speaking world. He became a chaplain for the United States Bureau of Prisons, bringing Islamic education to inmates across the country. He worked with the United Nations and with various international organizations. He founded numerous Islamic educational initiatives. He appeared on television programs around the world discussing Islam. He traveled to dozens of countries speaking about his journey and about the message of Islam. His message was always rooted in his personal experience. He spoke not as someone who had been born into Islam and was defending his inherited tradition. He spoke as someone who had stood exactly where his audience stood, who had read the same Bible, who had held the same assumptions, who had the same questions, and who had followed those questions honestly to a conclusion that surprised him more than anyone. He always emphasized one point above all others. He did not leave Christianity because someone attacked it. He did not become Muslim because someone pressured him. He became Muslim because he read his own Bible carefully, because he asked honest questions, because he was willing to follow the evidence of his own reading and his own reason. The truth, he said, was always available. It was in the texts. It was in the logic. It just required the honesty to look at it clearly. In one of his most famous lectures, he said, "I came to Islam through the back door. I was trying to take a Muslim out of Islam, and Islam took me in instead. I brought my Bible to the conversation, and my Bible showed me the way to the Quran. I was trying to save a Muslim, and God saved me." He also spoke about what Islam gave him that he had not had before: a complete, clear, unambiguous understanding of who God is. One God. Not a mystery to be accepted without understanding. Not a paradox to be believed despite its apparent contradictions. One God, eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful, merciful, just, the creator of everything, who sent prophets to every people in every age, and whose final message was preserved completely and unchanged in the Quran. This clarity, Estes said, was something he had been searching for his whole life without knowing he was searching for it. The Quran says in chapter Al-Hadid, verse 20, "Know that the life of this world is but amusement and diversion, and adornment, and boasting to one another, and competition in increase of wealth and children." Yusuf Estes had the wealth, he had the success, he had the comfort, he had the amusement. And he found that none of it answered the deepest questions. Islam answered the deepest questions. And once those questions were answered, everything else fell into place. His story is ultimately a story about what happens when a person is genuinely honest, when a person is willing to examine what they believe, not just defend it, when a person is willing to follow questions wherever they lead, even if they lead somewhere unexpected. Yusuf Estes had every reason to stay where he was. He had comfort, community, career, and a settled faith. He gave all of it up not because his life was empty, but because truth mattered more to him than comfort. And in giving it up, he found something that no amount of business success or religious comfort had ever given him. He found certainty. He found clarity. He found peace. The Quran says in chapter Ar-Ra'd, verse 28, "Verily, in the remembrance of God, do hearts find rest." Yusuf Estes spent the first half of his life building a comfortable life without rest, and he found rest in the last place he ever expected to look. May we all have the honesty to examine what we believe. May we all have the courage to follow the truth wherever it leads. And may we all find the rest that only truth can give. If this story touched your heart and made you think, please subscribe to this channel right now and press the bell icon. Share this video with someone who is asking questions about faith and searching for honest answers. Your one share might be the beginning of someone else's journey toward truth. Thank you so much for being here and for watching.